In this video, we are going to examine the altcoin trilemma. What every altcoin faces the problem of having to identify what its central value proposition is going to be. And I break these down into three choices, and this is the trilemma. Basically, your altcoin can try to be money, a utility token, or can try to be a security. And every altcoin out there needs to decide to be one of these. But for altcoins, there is very, very deeply rooted issues with each option. There is insoluble problems with each option. Regardless of which one you decide to commit to as an altcoin, there are going to be some serious existential problems with that choice. That's how I would put it. Existential in the sense that if a particular altcoin ultimately fails to solve the problem relating to which avenue it chose to commit to in terms of value proposition, if it fails to address that problem, ultimately that altcoin is going to fail. It's going to go to zero in the final analysis. So let's examine these three options. Every altcoin has the option to be money, a utility token, or a security. Let's set aside the option of becoming money for last. And let's examine first the ubiquitous utility token. What is a utility token? It basically is you have an altcoin that in some way it provides the ability to use a network for some function. So the network, for example, could be, let's say, supply chain tracking or something like that. It's some service that is provided. Usually, it's marketed as being a decentralized service, and in order to use it, you have to own the altcoin. The altcoin is essentially a token that the user of the network has to buy in order to use to access the utility of that network. Now, right away, we encounter a serious problem from an economic perspective, from the perspective of someone who is buying a utility token in order to profit from it. Okay, we're not talking about a person who's buying the utility token in order to use the service, because that's not what people are doing with altcoins. People are buying altcoins, they are buying utility tokens because they expect them to appreciate. And from that perspective, there's a serious problem here, because with a utility token, there is this dynamic in which there's a race to the bottom in terms of the pricing of that service. Let's say that you have this supply chain tracking service. From the perspective of the client who's actually using the service, they don't care about the token. What they care about, for whatever reason, is the service provided, and they don't care who provides that service as long as essentially they get the best deal, the best quote, the best. It's sort of like with, if you're building, let's say, a deck, you look at the quotes from 5 different contractors, and all things being equal, at the end of the day, you're choosing the contractor that gives you the lowest quote. The same is the case for any service provided by a so-called, blockchain. If you are the client looking for that service, really at the end of the day, all things being equal, you're going with the service that charges the least. And in this competitive environment, there is a race to the bottom. There is a serious danger of your particular altcoin's service being undercut by another. Obviously, this is just the basics of economics. This is how business works, and that provides a deterrent or a limiting factor when it comes to the ability of a utility token to accrue value, because perhaps right now your altcoin provides a service that is unique in the space, but as soon as it gains any traction, you're right away going to have competitors. And those competitors, to the extent that they provide a similar service in terms of quality, if they undercut your altcoin, your utility token, in terms of price, the clients are going to naturally gravitate towards the one with the best quote, with the one that is cheapest for them to use. And then what happens to your altcoin? What happens to your utility token if the network is not being used? What happens to the value of your utility token if all the clients have moved their business to the lowest bidder, right? The one with the best quote. Well, then your whole platform is dead, and the utility token is truly worthless. If the whole value proposition of the utility token is people are using that network, they are utilizing it, well, now the utility token it's worth nothing. It's zero. So this is just a fundamental problem with all utility tokens. It's subject to this race to the bottom. And all of this assumes that clients even want to use it, or to have to buy, hold, or utilize a token to use a service. Clients, whether they are individuals or multinational corporations, they don't want to have to go jump through the hoops of buying, holding, using a utility token just for a service. It would be like if your power company required you to jump through hoops to use the power corporation's private coin to pay your bill. You know what I mean? That people do not want to have to deal with this kind of hassle. And on an institutional level, in many cases, they legally cannot. It's really complicated from a legal perspective for a corporation to be buying these utility tokens in order to use a service. What people want to be able to do is to pay for all services with just money, right? It makes no sense for every service to have its own native money. And this is essentially what utility tokens are trying to do. Utility tokens are trying to be the native money for a particular service, but often that service itself is so obscure, there's just no real justification for a person or an institution to have to buy a different type of money just to be able to use one service. People don't want to have to buy a dozen or 100 different currencies, each one individually required just to use one service. That's not going to work. That's not what happens with any other business or service. You don't have a barbershop token that you are required to use when you go to the barber. You don't have a grocery store token. No, all goods and services, you just use money to pay for them. You don't have an individual utility token for your utilities. You don't have a utility token for your water bill, and I don't think that it makes any sense to apply any different logic to a decentralized service, whether it's supply chain management or digital identification or whatever other sort of use case of decentralized quote unquote blockchains, whatever use case you can think of, that service which you are selling on the open market, any client that wants that service ultimately is just going to want to use money to pay for it. They don't want to have a special token for that one service. That's just not going to happen. So the value proposition, the idea of utility tokens itself, I would say is seriously flawed for these two reasons. Now this brings us to a different way of justifying the existence or the value of an altcoin, and that's that it serves as a security. So let's say that you have a service or a business that you offer, and it is a successful one, and you have clients, you have you're making profit. Well, that's good. I mean, that's how businesses work, and to the extent that you are capable of providing that service economically, you will be profitable, and whoever owns a fraction of that business will get a proportional share of those profits. So to the extent that you are an altcoin, or should I say to the extent that you are a business that provides a service, like a decentralized service, let's call it, again, supply chain management, decentralized supply chain management. Let's say that your business that provides that service is successful. Well, the value proposition of a security token is that the security token represents ownership of that business, proportional ownership. It's basically a stock. It's a share. It's equity, and that obviously makes sense. This is what stocks exist for. But the problem is, if you are a security token, well, then you represent a security, and you are subject to the governing authority of the SEC, or whatever other similar governing or equivalent governing authority in your domestic jurisdiction is. So if your token is simply a security, well, was that security issued in compliance with securities law? And if it was, then really your token is simply it's just a equity. It's just a stock share. The value of your security token, assuming it's legal, assuming that the SEC isn't going to go after it, which is a whole different question. But let's assume it's all above board. It's just a stock. It's just equity. And the value of your share of that business is measured in the profitability of that business. It is measured in how much revenue is that business or that service generating, and how much of that revenue is captured as profit. That's all it is. So the measure of your security token is you use the exact same measures that you would apply to any other stock, because it's simply fractional ownership of a business that is in which ownership of it is held as basically a token, instead of being held on the New York Stock Exchange with your brokerage. It's just a different method of holding that equity, and that's it. So to classify security token as being anything different functionally from just a stock is misleading. And if you want to buy shares of a company that is providing a decentralized service, just recognize that that's what you're doing. You're investing in a business. To the extent that that business is not profitable, That's the value of that security token is going to ultimately reflect that. And there's all sorts of other questions you have to ask, like, let's say you have this security token that represents ownership of the company. Well, you need to ask, how are profits ultimately being returned to you as the holder of that token? Is there a dividend? Is there voting rights? All the same questions you have to ask of a stock, you have to ask of your security token. How is profit going to be returned to you? Or is your security token basically just a scam? And the real owners of the company providing that decentralized blockchain service, the real owners actually have traditional equity ownership and are the only ones who have claim to the profit of that business. And here's a great example of what I'm talking about. Just recently, I read this article about how the Green Bay Packers are issuing shares to the public, and you can buy a single share of the Green Bay Packers for $300. What does this mean to own a share in the Green Bay Packers? Well, they announced that anyone considering the purchase of Packers stock should not purchase the stock to make a profit or to receive a dividend or tax deduction or any other economic benefits. Unquote. They literally, it's literally just a piece of paper you are buying for $300. They explicitly state that there's no economic benefit attached to owning the share. So it's not really a share. It's basically a donation to the Green Bay Packers, or it's you are buying a piece of paper to put on your wall that says that you bought a share. But that's all it is. And many security tokens in the crypto space, quote unquote, have this exact same dynamic. You are not actually nothing is owed to you. You buy this token and you say to yourself, oh, I own a portion of this service, but the real owners of that service are the only ones who are taking profit, who are able to dip into the cash flows of that business. They're the only ones who are the real owners. Your security token is no different than this Green Bay Packers so-called share. So this is the problem with security tokens. To the extent that they are legitimate, and I really don't think there is too many that are, to the extent that they are legitimate, though, that there is functionally no difference between buying that security token and buying stocks. And there's no reason to assume or to believe that your investment will behave any different than if you were just to buy traditional stocks. Just because it's crypto, right, does not mean that it will not be subject to all the same factors which go into valuing a common shares, a common stock. So, and if that's the case, don't delude yourself into thinking that there's any difference between what you're doing and just buying individual stocks. You might as well just go onto the stock market and look for different companies that you like and try to pick one. That's literally what you're doing with security tokens, to the extent that they are legitimate. And many, if not most of them, are not. Many, if not most of them, are not even legally compliant. Many, if not most of them, will ultimately just be like these Green Bay Packer tokens, just of no economic value, representative of nothing, and therefore ultimately worthless. Now, I think this video is is starting to get a little long. I like to keep them around 20 minutes or less. So we're going to save the next potential option for an altcoin, which is money. So if you're an altcoin and you're coming onto the market, you have to decide, are you going to be a utility token, a security token, or money? Now, we've examined utility tokens and security tokens, and there's problems with both of those. And to the extent that your altcoin that you own or you're thinking about buying is claiming to be either one, you have to really look at the problems with both utility tokens and security tokens. Know what you're buying. Know what it means to have or to be buying a utility token or a security token. In the next video, we will examine the third option, which is money. And the problem, the fatal flaw of any crypto that claims to be money or is trying to be money. And it can be summarized as the following. You are in competition with Bitcoin. And we'll explore that in more detail in the next video.